everyone, and happy Wednesday. I hope you're all doing well out there. I hope you're having a beautiful week. So today I wanted to start something that I've been thinking about doing for a while, kind of since before I even started this channel. I want to do book reviews for you. Unlike normal book reviews, I will not be reading like new books, or well, I'll read them, but I won't be reviewing newer books or more modern books. These are books that have been around for a while and that I just never got around to reading, things that I have heard about pretty much my entire life and have wanted to get into, movies that I love that I've never read. So I just want to go back and read these things and then give you guys my impression of them, because I haven't seen a lot of modern day reflections on these books. So on this list I have a few books by Stephen King. I've got some things written back in the 70s and the 60s. This week I am reviewing Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. Rosemary's Baby was written in 1967, so that's about 50 years or so ago, 51 years I think to be exact, and it is a horror or thriller novel. You've probably seen adaptations of it. There's at least one movie and like a TV show or miniseries / movie thing that I know that exists of it, and I've heard of it my entire life. I have never watched the movie Rosemary's Baby, and I have never read the book. People don't, I guess, talk about it as much. Like, people love the story apparently enough to make movies about it, but I haven't heard much about it. So I actually went into this experience with no real knowledge other than the basic Rosemary gets pregnant and the baby is like, there's something demonic around it. Like, either like there are bad Satan loving people who want the baby, or the baby is evil itself. So I had no idea what I was going into. I had no idea exactly how this story would play out other than those basics. And I just want to start off by saying that it was a very good read. Like, I really, really enjoyed reading this book. It had a super slow start. It took until about halfway through for things to really start to feel like they were moving forward and there was actual action. And before that, it seemed like a lot of setup. But all of that setup was, I think, part of what made it so chilling for me. This book gave me like serious feelings of anxiety and discomfort. Like, I really enjoyed the book. I am putting that out there right now because there were so many things that made me just mad and anxious. And Rosemary, the main character, is not very bright. There were clues from the very beginning. There were things that were, to me, obvious. And I guess maybe I'm just really genre savvy at this point, but I feel like if these things are happening in real life, they should be at least kind of obvious. But Ira Levin did a thing where he made it clear that Rosemary comes from, she's not the most fully educated person. She comes from a very religious farm sort of family in Omaha. So they're very deeply religious and not very scientific. They are very trusting of other people. And Rosemary has left that religion behind when she moved to New York. She's estranged from her family, and she's married to an actor named Guy. Let's not even talk about his name. But Guy is kind of a struggling actor at the beginning of the book, and they hear that they get into this house, this apartment house called the Bramford, and they're super excited about it, and it's a beautiful, wonderful house. The lady who used to live in the apartment that they live in has died of a coma, or she's in a coma and isn't expected to come out of it or something like that at the beginning, and she does eventually die of that coma, and they take over her apartment. Their neighbors is this elderly couple who takes way too much interest in them. Early on, when they move into the building, Rosemary meets another tenant who lives with those elderly neighbors, a young woman named Terry. And Terry is sweet. She's a former drug addict, and the neighbors, the Castavets, took her off of the street and helped her get back on her feet and are sending her to school and all of this stuff. So she and Rosemary kind of strike up a friendship when they meet in the building's creepy laundry room. And this seems to be going well. Everything seems to be going fine until one day Rosemary and Guy go out for a show, I believe. They go out to see a show, and when they return, Terry is dead. She's jumped out of the window, and cops are everywhere, and people are watching. And soon after they return, the Castevets also return because they had been out, and they're very upset and surprised about this. So later that night, Rosemary is falling asleep, and she hears a conversation that mingles in with her dreams that's, for the reader, is obviously coming from the neighbors. For Rosemary, I guess it's just like all a dream, and she's going to let it go past. But this conversation essentially is the Castevets yelling about Terry's death and saying things like, you shouldn't have told her, we didn't need her, some drug addict off the street, we could have had anybody as long as she's healthy and young and not a virgin, it could have been anybody, why did we have to go with her, now we have to start all over. So this is what Rosemary is hearing in her dream. And she wakes up and she brushes it off. She's like, whatever, it's a weird dream. She visualized the voice coming from a nun from her childhood. So it's just a really weird, creepy dream that she was having. But as it goes on, things get a little bit weirder and weirder. The neighbors invite her and her husband over for dinner. And they go over there. The husband falls into the stories of the neighbors, and he becomes almost like a surrogate son to them, and it gets to the point where they're going to their house almost every day, and the neighbors are coming over and bringing treats, and they're getting really close. But Rosemary doesn't really like them. She doesn't really feel comfortable about them. She thinks they're meddling. They're a little bit too much in her business. They are a little too nosy. Like Mrs. Castevet, the first time she comes over, essentially just goes through all of the cabinets and looks throughout all of Rosemary's house and just openly says, hey, I'm nosy, this is what I do. And she does it, and Rosemary is super polite. She was way too polite, and this is probably my biggest issue with her, is that whenever she's questioning someone else's behavior or motives, she instantly tells herself how wrong she is about it. She instantly kind of dismisses her own instincts. And Ira Levin did a really good job of showing this, because if he hadn't, it wouldn't have frustrated me so much. But she's very obviously tampering down her instincts and telling herself that it's based on her lack of education or her lack of knowledge about other people. The Castevets kind of push themselves into her life. They bring their friends into her life. And soon after all of the connection, her husband gets a big break in his job. The big break actually comes at the expense of another actor, a guy named Donald, who goes blind all of a sudden. And it's this freak accident, and no one knows how it happens. The doctors don't know how to fix it, but this means that Guy gets a big role. This big role is in a play that is panned. No one really liked it, but everyone who saw it loved Guy's performance. And so Guy gets an invite to a TV show, and he's starring in a TV show now, and he gets into conversation with Warner Brothers, and he gets talking about movies and all this stuff. His career is just snowballing into stardom. And as this is happening, he says to Rosemary, hey, why don't we have a baby? This is strange to her, because she's wanted a baby their whole marriage. He has not. He has been putting it off. He has been pushing it back. He has been avoiding the conversation. And then suddenly he says, let's have a baby. And of course she's excited. Of course she's like, really? Yes, let's do this. So they plan this date night. And Guy is supposed to get the dessert for the date night. So he goes out. Rosemary makes dinner, and she does everything planning for a date night. And Guy comes back, and he's like, oh, I forgot dessert, because he was out doing something else too. He's like, oh, I forgot dessert. They're eating dinner, they're having a nice night, and then the doorbell rings, and it's Mrs. Castevet. It's the neighbor, and she's bringing dessert. She's like, I made extra, why don't you guys have them? And Guy's like, oh, it's serendipity, it's fate, whatever. So Rosemary's already a little bit annoyed by the neighbors. She's annoyed by how they keep trying to bring her weird food. She's not like in love with the taste of the pudding either. She says it tastes chalky and she doesn't really want to eat it. And Guy says it's rude of you to not eat this. It's rude of you to take something and not use it. Then he points out that Miss Castevet had earlier in the book given her a gift. She'd given her a necklace with, it's like a little round charm with some green moss or something inside. And Rosemary hates the smell of it. Rosemary saw this first because Terry showed it to her in the laundry room and said it was a good luck charm. Rosemary put it away. Guy tells her that you've taken these things from Miss Castevet, but you're very rude because you're not using them. You're not wearing the gifts that she gives you. I don't think that's very kind. Rosemary tells herself that this is because Guy has taken a liking to these people. So he is probably more interested in their feelings than she is. So to make him feel better, she takes a couple of bites of the pudding and then she dumps it out while he's out of the room and makes it look like she ate all of it. So as the night goes on, Rosemary starts to feel drowsy and weak. And Guy's like, all right, let's get you to bed. And she's like, but it's baby night. And he's like, look at you, you're too tired. Go to bed. He helps her into bed and she's getting drowsier and drowsier and drowsier and he's undressing her. He tells her, you know, we can try again tomorrow. It's not an exact science. But at the same time, he had picked this date on the calendar and said, this is the day when we have to do it. He watches her cycle, so he's like, this is the day when you're the most fertile, when it's the best. So she's thinking it's weird that he's like, nah, let's go to bed. I want to alert anybody before I say explain the next scene. It is a dark scene and it is a rape scene. So if you are not interested in that, you can skip ahead. I'll try to remember to put a timestamp in the description for those of you who would like to just skip past the description of this scene. So he has undressed her and she's passed out, but she didn't eat all of the pudding, and so she's only kind of half in, half out the whole time. And she thinks she's dreaming as she feels that people have lifted her out of her bed and taken her through the broom closet in their apartment into a weird space. And there are candles, and there's her neighbors and all of their friends, and the doctor, and some strange guy, and her husband who's nude. A whole group of people surrounding her, and they're all naked, and they're all chanting, and there are black candles, and she feels like she's dreaming, but she's also awake to the point where her body can't move, but she's watching everything going on, and she's rationalizing it to herself. She's telling herself that this is a dream, that this isn't real, that the man who's on top of her, whose body feels leathery and heavy and smells like that charm necklace and is just really not positive at all. She's telling herself that that's her husband, and she's also telling herself that this is just a dream, and all this stuff is happening. They're painting blood on her skin, and they're like letting this person that's on top of her is not her husband, and that is clear to the reader and not clear to Rosemary. So she wakes up the next morning and she's undressed and her skin is kind of covered in scratches, and Guy has a couple of bruises, and he tells her, I figured I would just go ahead and do it. It was kind of nice with you laying all still, and it's just really, really gross and really uncomfortable. That makes Rosemary uncomfortable. So after like a couple of days, she decides to take a vacation by herself. She has a friend. He's an older man named Hutch who helped her out when she first moved to New York, her and her roommates. And so he's kind of like a father figure to her. And he has an old cabin that he doesn't really go to, and he loans her his car and lets her go there. And she stays for an entire 5 days. And she feels good, and she's telling herself, you know, like, there are things I'm not happy with, there are things that need to be balanced, there are conversations that I need to have with my husband to fix this, I'm not comfortable with what happened, and these are all really healthy thoughts that she's having. And so she's telling herself that we are going to have this conversation, my husband and I, and we're going to make things better, and we're going to reconnect with each other. But when she comes home, they don't really talk. They talk about the furniture, they talk about the weather, they exist pretty much on small talk for days on end. And then Guy says, aren't you supposed to be on your period? Aren't you late? I don't want to get your hopes up, but let's get excited. And she gets excited and she forgets everything she wanted to talk about. She forgets everything. She tells herself, we can talk later. I'm pregnant. She's so happy to find out that she's pregnant. And she's going to a doctor, and the doctor asks her for more blood tests because he thinks there's something weird about her blood. He tells her that she's not in any danger, but there's just something off and he'd like to look into it. As soon as she tells her husband that, the neighbors show up from next door and they're like, oh, we know this famous doctor. You should go to this famous doctor. He's a friend of ours and you can go to him for a steal. Like, he won't charge you society prices. And she agrees. She goes to this famous doctor and no longer does she have any worries about the blood test. She's like, that doctor, that stupid Dr. Hill, screw that guy. And that leads her to putting complete trust in this new doctor that she has. And so when she starts getting stomach pains that seem to never end, like just cramps, and the pain gets worse and it gets worse. And the doctor just keeps telling her it's going to stop in a day or two. He keeps telling her that it's because she's not flexible enough. He keeps telling her that she doesn't need any medication. He doesn't even give her prenatals. He tells her that their neighbor, Miss Castevet, can make Rosemary a milkshake that will be packed full of nutrients, and she has to drink it every day. So Miss Castevet brings her that drink every single day, and the pain never goes away. For some reason, Rosemary decides she should put on the necklace because Miss Castevet has been so nice to her and taking care of her. And I totally get it. From the outside, maybe it looks that way, but from the reader, it's pretty clear that something weird is going on, something uncomfortable is going on. And as crazy as it would seem, there is an actual conspiracy around Rosemary right now. And I can see that from the outside, but Rosemary cannot. She's also just really willing to accept what the doctor is telling her and what everyone else is telling her about herself, to the point that she becomes lost in a haze of pain. It just becomes her everyday experience. It's just pain all the time. And when Hutch finally comes to visit after she's in her third month, he remarks that she looks like she's actually lost so many pounds, and she's like, no, it's just 3 at most. And literally everyone says it's just three at most, in the exact same way that she says it, in the same way that the doctor says it when Hutch brings it up. Her neighbor, Mr. Castevet, comes over to meet Hutch, and he says the exact same thing. And then Guy comes home soon after the neighbor leaves, and he says the same thing. But it is clear to Hutch that she's lost maybe way more pounds, like at least 20 pounds at this point, and she's in her 3rd month of pregnancy. And he notices the necklace that she's wearing. He notices the charm, and he asks her what it's called, and he says he's going to look into it and research it. He also notices that the neighbors, when there was a sudden blackout, brought black candles to light the apartment for them, and the black candles are still on the mantle. So he notices all these things and says he's going to look into it as he visits, and then he leaves. He calls Rosemary later that night and says he wants to meet her the next morning. And of course, she tells her husband that, and she tells him exactly what time they're meeting and exactly where they're supposed to be meeting. And suddenly, Guy wants to go out for ice cream. He says something, he makes a joke about pregnancy cravings and how he's got them instead, and he goes out for ice cream. The next morning, Rosemary waits to meet Hutch, and he never shows up. She finds out later that he's in a coma. Hutch is in a coma, and Rosemary is sad, but she's busy being pregnant, and she doesn't know what he wanted to tell her, so she decides to focus instead on her pregnancy and just kind of send love to Hutch and talk to his daughter. As time goes on, things get weirder and weirder and creepier, and the neighbors get more and more involved in her life and in her pregnancy. But eventually Rosemary gets fed up with their presence and decides to throw a party. And for this party, she invites all of her old friends, people that she hadn't seen since before she got pregnant, people she kind of had stopped talking to for one reason or another, just because she had isolated herself, and her husband and her neighbors had isolated her and put her into their bubble. And her husband wouldn't let her go outside because of the pain, and she was very submissive to him. But this time she's like, you know what, I'm having a party, and Guy can't stop her. He's like, are you sure you want to do that? You're in pain, you're weak, are you sure that's the best for you? And she's like, yes, I'm going to do that, and I'm not inviting the neighbors, I'm not inviting their friends, nobody from this building, only my friends. So she has this party, and all of her friends show up, and it's a nice, sweet, I think it's a Christmas party, and it seems like a nice environment, but Rosemary is wound up. The way that Ira Levin writes this party is extremely interesting. He makes it very mobile, so it's almost as if it's one of those scenes where the camera is panning through the party and you're watching little bits and pieces of the night, and every now and then you see the main character dealing with people who are there. You see the time she spends greeting everybody and introducing everybody and making sure that drinks are refreshed and that the bartender is pleased with what he's doing because he is apparently a great bartender, and she's got to toss salad and make sure everything runs smoothly. And it's just really well written. It's just like, it's very immersive the way he's written this scene. Later on in the party, Rosemary and her friends are in the kitchen. One of her friends is like, you don't look good. You look sick. You look tiny. You're not really showing all that much. Are you sure you're okay? And Rosemary breaks down crying, and she talks about the pain that she's been in, and they're like, get another doctor. There's nothing wrong with getting another opinion. This doctor is some sort of sadistic, crazy person letting you feel pain for all these months and not giving you any kind of medication, just telling you to take aspirin. What the heck is his problem? And her friends are right. Everybody knows they're right. Rosemary knows that they're right. Guy keeps trying to come into the kitchen. They're not letting him. It's girl time. Eventually, they convince Rosemary to go to another doctor on Monday, and she says yes. Yes, she will. She tells Guy this. She tells him, after the party, she's like, I'm going to go see another doctor. I just want a second opinion. And Guy gets pissed. He's like, why? And she's like, the girls think it's good for me, and he's like, those bitches don't know anything. Like, he calls them that. And Rosemary, of course, gets mad, and she's like, I'm going, whether or not you're paying for it, or I am going. And he's like, I'm not paying for it. And she's like, I'm also not drinking any more of Minnie's shakes. And he's getting mad at her, and he's essentially calling her crazy. So they're having this argument, and suddenly the pain stops. And she's a little freaked out. She thinks, what if she killed the baby? She had, for like 3 days before this, stopped drinking the milkshakes already before she told Guy. And she thought her new daily drink that she put a little bit of sherry in had maybe killed the baby, and that's why all the pain was gone. And she was freaked out, but then suddenly the baby moved. She felt it kick. She felt movement, and she showed it to Guy, and he was like, he seemed grossed out and distanced himself from it. And she's like, it's not gonna hurt you, and she thinks it's funny and laughs, but he's not really interested in touching the baby. But because the pain stopped finally after months and months, she decides that maybe the doctor was trustworthy after all, and so she's not gonna need to get a second opinion. She then decides that she should go back to drinking the drinks because she thought she almost killed the baby. Drinking those drinks would help relieve her guilt. So near the end of her pregnancy, near the 9th month, she finds out that her friend Hutch has died. He never woke up from his coma. She goes to, she had barely been visiting him, and she'd let herself get stuck in a baby bubble where that's all she focused on and that's all she allowed herself to think about because she was feeling so much better. She was no longer in pain, and so she kind of went into her own little thing while her husband was off making shows and barely at home. She would spend her time with the neighbors and with their friends, people coming by to help her take care of things because she was pregnant and they were very interested in taking care of her. So she finds out that Hutch has died, and Guy reacts in fear, and she's surprised by his reaction. She's surprised by his what she thinks is sadness over the guy's death. But she goes to the memorial on her own. At this memorial, one of Hutch's other friends, an older lady, gives her a package, and she says, Hutch wanted you to have this. In his last moments, he told me to give this to you. He woke up and he told me that this was for you, and the name is an anagram. That's all he said, and then he was gone. So Rosemary gets this package. She takes it home. She drinks the drink that Miss Castevet brings over after she gets home, and then she opens the package, and it is a book called All of Them Witches, and it's all about witches, and it's some dark stuff, and it's very satanic, and like goes against my inner pagan, but it's pretty well described. And there is a guy in there who used to live in the building that they lived in, because Hutch told her all about all the horrible things that happened in this supposedly cursed building that is one of the most beautiful fancy buildings in New York. And so one of the guys in there is a guy who used to live in their building, and she decides to get out the Scrabble board and try to find out what the anagram is. She thinks that it means that it's the name of the book, so she tries to make anagrams out of All of Them Witches. That doesn't work. Then she goes to the guy's name, and then she goes to his son's name. I think it's Stephen Marcato or something like that, but the name is an anagram for Mr. Castevet's name. And she realizes that Mr. Castevet is the son of this evil witch that she's reading about in this book. And she starts to think about things like the candles, and she goes through her day shopping and cleaning and appointments and everything, and the whole time she is coming back to these things. She's coming back to that weird dream she had in the beginning. She's coming back to the black candle. She's coming back to the coma that the last tenant went in, and how similar it was to what happened to Hutch. One of the things that she read in the book was that the witches would need a personal belonging from whoever they're targeting for a spell, especially something like a coma spell, and Hutch's glove had gone missing that very day that he came to visit. How could Mr. Castevet have taken the glove when she was with him the whole time that he had come over that day Hutch came over? And then she realizes, is my husband a part of this? What? It's weird. And she's like freaked out. And so as she's realizing these things, she starts to question everything, and she still, for some reason, tells Guy about it. And she tells Guy about this book, and she's like, all of them I think are witches. And he's like, I suppose you think your doctor is a witch too? And she's like, no, he's too smart for that. So she's still got this implicit trust in her doctor. She's telling Guy all about this, and he's like, he puts the book away, and he's like, you need to go to bed. This is stressing you out. You're in your 9th month of pregnancy. I'm not comfortable with you stressing yourself out and endangering the baby like this. And he is making her believe in just how much he loves her and how much like he wants her to rest. So she agrees. She goes to bed, and then when she gets up, there's other stuff to do, but eventually she wants to go back to the book, and he's thrown it out. And she's like, why would you throw that away? You don't throw away someone's book. And he's like, I thought it was stressing you out. I just didn't want you to be stressed, and I didn't think it was that big of a deal. And she's like, that's the last thing Hutch left me. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. And she tells her doctor all about this too, because she trusts him as well. And she's like, my neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Castevet, I think they're witches. And I know that witches aren't a real thing, but they believe it, and I'm afraid for my baby. I'm afraid that they're going to try to hurt me or my baby because of what they believe, even if I don't believe it. And the doctor is like, oh, that's strange. You wouldn't believe it, huh? And he's like, well, if you don't feel comfortable with them, they didn't want to tell you this so close to your birth, but they're actually going out of town for a little bit, and they don't know when they'll be back. And she's like, oh, really? That's weird. And he's like, they didn't want to tell you, they didn't want to upset you or make you feel bad for being left or feel abandoned, but I bet they'd be happy to go. Like, Roman is old, he's in his late 70s, he might die, so he wants to see more of the world. He's been everywhere, but he wants to go everywhere else too. So she takes that and she's fine with it, and as soon as she gets home, the neighbors show up and they're like, well, we're going on a vacation. It's obvious that the doctor told them about his conversation with Rosemary, and they're like, yeah, we're going. And they're like, we know you found out who his dad was. He keeps it a secret because people judge him, and people have stopped being our friends because of that. And it seems very logical. And Rosemary starts to actually feel bad for thinking that, oh, they're bad guys, they're witches, just because he's related to a bad guy. I've made him guilty by association. I am obviously the dick here. And so she's feeling bad, but they still go on their vacation. She and Guy help them into the cab and send them away. Later that night, she feels like she hears noise coming from their apartment, but she doesn't really pay attention to it. A couple of days later, she's back in baby mode. She's feeling a little bit better. She's even gotten a postcard from the Castavets, and so she's out shopping or whatever, and she runs into her husband's former vocal coach. And she thanks him for a gift that he'd given her a while back, that he'd given them tickets to a show. And the guy's like, I never gave you tickets to a show. And she's like, what do you mean? Guy brought home tickets, said you gave them to him. And he is like, I never had tickets for that show. I wish I had tickets for that show, The Fantastics, but it never happened. Sorry, maybe he's mistaken. So Rosemary starts to question things again. She starts to get confused again, and she's like, why did he lie about that? Maybe he got them gambling, or maybe he got them from a woman. Surely that's why he lied. And she again starts trying to rationalize everything that's been going on. She rationalizes the candles. She rationalizes everything. But something in her realizes, finally, that things are weird. And she takes off the necklace that she's been wearing this whole time with the stinky herb in it, and she drops it in the sewer. She goes home. She refuses to take any of the medication that the doctor has given her, and she's kind of looking at Guy with a suspicious eye. She starts to think about some of the things that he's said over the book, some of the things that he seems to know about that she has no idea how he would know about, like the private parties that the neighbors have and the specific instrument that they keep hearing through the wall. How would he know that unless he'd been to one of those parties when she wasn't around? Is that why he got her out of the house this one time? What has he been doing secretly without her? And so she's starting to look at his actions over these last 9 months, and starting to look at the actions of the neighbors that she's already suspicious of, that she already thinks are witches. And even though she felt a little bit guilty for thinking that, this reveal of a lie is what strengthens her belief that all of them are plotting against her and plotting against her baby. She's not 100% sure, but she thinks they want to take her baby from her. She thinks that Guy promised them the baby for its blood or flesh or whatever in exchange for his fame. And so she decides to call up the guy that went blind, and she asks him if Guy has anything that is his. And the guy, Donald, reveals that Don and Guy exchanged ties the day or a few days before he went blind. So of course she's starting to really freak out. She's like, is my husband a witch? Is he part of this whole coven of old people witches? What do? I should go check with my doctor because I'm not comfortable and I don't know if I trust them. And so she goes to her doctor's office without an appointment. She's at the doctor's office and she's waiting, and she has put on a bunch of cologne or perfume, and she smells really nice, and the receptionist remarks on that, and she's like, thanks. And she's like, usually you have that same smell that Dr. Saperstein has. You usually smell exactly like him. Haven't you noticed? And Rosemary's like, no, what do you mean? And she's like, the thing that you wear, it smells just like the doctor does all the time. And finally it clicks to Rosemary that the doctor is also a part of this whole thing. And so she just kind of hoofs it out of there, and she decides to call the former doctor that she'd gone to, Dr. Hill. And she begs him to see her and begs him to deliver her baby that night so that she can get away. Eventually he gives in and he goes to her, and she tells him everything. She tells him all of her theories. She tells him everything that's been going on. She tells him all about the witches, about the book, about Guy, about the Hutch's glove going missing, about the tie, the blindness. She tells him about the herb that they're calling Tannis root. She tells him just everything about what's been going on, and he seems to care. He seems not to be judging her, and he asks her to go wait in one of his rooms while he tries to get her set up to deliver the baby. So she goes into this room and she kind of falls asleep, but then he comes back and he's got the other doctor and her husband, Dr. Saperstein and Guy. They take her away and they're like, if you keep saying these things, we're going to have to put you away. You're going to have to go to a mental hospital. So she eventually just goes. And she goes home But in the hall of her home, she distracts them and then runs inside and locks, deadbolts and chains the front door. And she's like freaked out and trying to call anybody, her friends, her brother, anybody. No one seems available. No one is answering their phone, and she's upset. And then suddenly all of the people, the neighbors, the elderly, friends of them, the doctor, her husband, everybody is in her house suddenly, in her apartment. And the doctor has a needle, and he realizes as he's about to sedate her that she's going into labor. So she's sedated, and the baby is born. And when she wakes up, they tell her that the baby is no longer alive. She is stuck in her bed. She is pretty much kept under sedation. She's given medicine every day, and she is forced to pump out the leftover milk. And when she hears a baby crying, her husband tells her that a new couple has moved in with a baby upstairs. And she's like, oh, I knew that. And every time the baby cries, she produces milk. And she starts to realize that maybe my baby's not dead, because that is not upstairs. That sounds like it's right next door, and I'm responding to it physically, and I think you guys are keeping my baby. One time she tries to taint the milk before they take it from her, and they stop her. And so she starts to realize these things, and eventually stops taking the pills that they give her and starts hiding them. And she uses those to put one of her guards to sleep, and she realizes there's another way into the apartment because the door had been locked when they came in. She finds that way out after this guard is asleep, and she finds everybody, like pretty much the whole coven of people, in the neighbor's house, and they're like having a party and drinking, and she sees the black bassinet, and she goes over, and they don't stop her, and they're like, wait, before you look at the baby, you gotta just stop. And she looks at the baby and she thinks it's sweet until the eyes open. The eyes are completely yellow, and they look exactly like the eyes of the man in her dream, the man in the dream where the person on her was not her husband. And she realizes that this baby is not a human baby, that it's got a tail and it's got claws, and it's got these yellow eyes. And eventually she essentially just is sitting off to the side, and she realizes that the baby's fussy and that the person rocking the baby is doing it bad. And she goes over and she starts taking care of the baby, and she's talking to the baby, and she's like, I'm not mad at you, I'm mad at them. They lied to me, and they did all this stuff and played with me, but you're just an innocent baby. It's not your fault. And she starts taking care of it, and she realizes that everyone's looking at her, and suddenly everyone's saying, Hail Rosemary. And the baby, who they had named Adrian, she's like, his name is Andrew. And Roman tries to argue, but his wife is like, nah, his name's Andrew, she's the mother, respect her. And so everyone's like, Hail Rosemary, hail Andrew, hail Satan, hail Rosemary, hail Andrew, hail Satan. And that's essentially how the book ends. I do not like that ending. I really do not. I really wanted Rosemary to start, for once, kicking ass, to start, for once, making real active choices. I wanted, instead of her constantly taking things on and constantly just thinking about things and suspecting things, to really make a choice. Like, I understand the maternal pull towards the baby, but again, those people manipulated you, they raped you, they lied to you, they stole your baby from you, they killed because they wanted you to have this baby and they wanted no one else. They let you go through pain, they isolated you, they abused the crap out of you, Rosemary. Kill them all. That was my feeling. Like, there is no reason. I get it. You want to keep your little demon spawn baby? Do that. So demon up as a mom and kill all of those people, including your horrible ass husband who's been gaslighting you since page 1. This book disturbed me because of how much gaslighting and because of how much Rosemary didn't trust her own instincts. How often she would have a thought and then tell herself that that thought's not true, call herself an idiot girl. And Ira Levin wrote this in such a way that it was internally anguishing for me to watch, for me to read, for me to experience. It was an emotional journey. It was like, I knew something weird was going to happen, but even knowing that didn't change the feeling of watching it happen. It didn't change how I felt seeing like her husband tell her that her feelings are not valid, or that like what she's thinking is just crazy, and that she's a bad person for not accepting her weird neighbor's intrusion into her life, and essentially guilting her over and over until she just complied and they became a part of her life. It was just really difficult to watch. There's also on a level where I understand that nothing looked strange from the beginning and from the outside. It was all just like normal stuff. Like, she got a new place and her neighbors were interested in her life because they just lost the young lady that they had taken it off the street, and they were mourning and just needed a new childlike figure to replace her, essentially. They weren't initially creepy. It just got creepier over time, and then because of how creepy it got as it went, everything that they did beforehand was that much more like malicious. It was that much more terrifying to kind of see how nice people can pull you in and fill you up with the devil. This book made me super uncomfortable. It was super fun to read. After like the first half of the book, it picked up and was faster to read, but throughout the whole thing it was very interesting and kind of frightening, and like it chilled me at times just watching again Rosemary deny what's going on. She rationalized so many things, and it's like, nah, that's weird, chick. Move, like get out of that situation. That's not good for you. And the one time she seemed, or the couple of times that she seemed to realize that she wasn't in a good situation, either her husband or her own inner voice shot that away, or an event that like the pain stopping shot that away. I definitely recommend, if you want to read old books and you want something that's chilling. It's not, I wouldn't say it's all that dated. There are a lot of specifics in this book, specific events and specific happenings, like real world happenings, that make this feel more solid and do so much for making it feel like you're walking in Rosemary's shoes, or you're walking in her head. And it's very matter of fact the way things are said. It's just, this is what's happening, and you see some feeling there for Rosemary because you're in her head, but otherwise it's just very straightforward. This is what's happening, this is how people are reacting, this is how people are behaving, and from that you get so much, and it just feels so real and so solid and like scary in its own way. So I definitely recommend this if you're looking for something to disturb you and give you a slight feeling of discomfort. I recommend that you check out Rosemary's Baby. This has been a pretty long video. I do intend to do another one probably in a couple of months. I don't want to do this all the time. I do want to have shorter videos that you can watch like on your way to work or when you're exercising or whatever, just kind of like bite-sized 10-15 minutes tops types of videos. But these reviews I feel should come with recaps and synopses, just because they're older books, and I know I am not the only person who has never read them and has heard of them their entire life, so I want to make sure that I give you guys a full synopsis and a real review of my feelings. And my main feelings are just that Rosemary is not very bright. So yeah, that's just about all I think I had to say about this book. It was a really interesting read. Thank you so very much. If you liked this video, please subscribe, click the like button below, and share with your friends. Not all of my videos are this long, I promise. And come back every Wednesday for a new video, and remember always that I love you. Bye!